The tradition of Festivus begins with the airing of grievances. I got a lot of problems with you people.
Hey all, what's going on? This is Chicago Humanities Tapes, the audio version of the best of the live Chicago Humanities spring and fall festivals. I'm Alisa Rosenthal, and today we're bringing you prominent New York Times columnist Frank Bruni on his new book, The Age of Grievance. He explores just what feels so good and bad about grievances, big and small, political and petty, and what this means for us as we all share differences in a society that could use some unity. A full professor at Duke University in the School of Public Policy, Bruni has served roles as diverse as op-ed columnist, White House correspondent, Rome bureau chief, and chief restaurant critic. He chats with Eboo Patel, founder and president of Interfaith America, who served on President Obama's inaugural Faith Council. For more information on our speakers, head to the show notes or check out chicagohumanities.org, where you'll also find ticket information on our upcoming live Fall 2024 events. We've just announced tickets to our upcoming Neighborhood Days. Coming to Pilsen, we have incredible voices like celebrity stylist Law Roach, who styles Zendaya among many others, a day of interactive events with Chicago Humanities artist-in-residence Alberto Aguilar, and poet Aja Monet at Talia Hall. And at the University of Illinois Chicago, Connie Chung, Eric Larson, and so much more. Tickets are on sale to members beginning August 20th and to the general public August 22nd. So head to chicagohumanities.org for more info on becoming a member. This is Frank Bruni with Eboo Patel, live at the Chicago History Museum at the Chicago Humanities Spring Festival in April 2024.
Frank, welcome to Chicago.
I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing this.
I've been following your Twitter, and I see you've already made it to some of our best restaurants.
I went to Monteverde last night.
Yeah, lucky you. Lucky you.
Great place. Yeah, no, very lucky me, yeah.
Good for you. So I have to say, you're at a very special place here. I don't know if we'll feed you as well, the Chicago History Museum, but this is quite an institution. I always recommend people who come into the city come to this place, and I have to say that it's particularly special to me because my organization, back then it was called Interfaith Youth Corps, we held our first real program in this room back in 2003, 2004. So we're back. By the way, it's a lot fuller now than it was back then, just to let you know. So Frank and I had a moment backstage where I was saying to him, I've been reading you for, and then we both decided not to guess the number of years.
Yeah, no.
But it's been a long time.
Let's just say a couple.
That's right.
Make me feel young, not old, yeah.
Well, let's not make you feel old, but let's say that you have represented a viewpoint of sanity for a very long time in American letters, and we appreciate that.
Thank you.
Of generosity and sanity.
Thank you.
I also want to say a special thanks to you for writing the book, Where You Go Is Not Who You'll Be, because my two wonderful boys are not far from college age, and I'm hoping that you save me a lot of money, because there's a lot to be said for flagship state institutions.
Yes, I agree. Big fan of them.
All right. So I love the book, The Age of Grievance. Thank you. And one of the things is I was reading the book for a second time this past weekend, and it is that good to read it twice. It is that good. One of the things that struck me was, there's all of this conversation about how the left and right live not only in two different planets, but two different galaxies, but you have found the bridge. Everybody's always complaining.
Everybody's aggrieved, yeah.
Everybody's always complaining. So
I'm a force for unity.
Right, exactly. One of the things I love about the beginning of the book is this set of ridiculous, often inaccurate grievances. Mm-hmm. And I just thought it might be fun to begin with the question, which grievance, one from the left, one from the right, do you think is like the most ridiculous? Like the biggest eye roll, like eyes rolling out of your head kind of eye roll.
Sadly, there's so many there's such a buffet of grievances to choose from. I like my food metaphors. I'm just going to give you two that come to mind. I'm going to mention the one that starts the book, which is from the right, which is there was a moment in time, a couple of days, when Fox News was going crazy with this notion that when there was a shortage of formula for infants in the country, the Biden administration was giving it out for free to migrants at the border, to people who'd been detained having crossed the border. And Fox News went to town on this for several days, and they showed these images of these supposed box of formula, stockpiled at the border for them, not for you, not for real Americans, but for those interlopers. And if you just, and I can't take credit for this, somebody at CNN did it, if you just zoomed in on the cartons, it showed that they actually weren't infant formula, it was powdered milk for children between the ages of 1 and 3. That was not in short supply. But on Fox News, it was just so tempting in this age of grievance of ours to turn this into an us versus them narrative, to turn this into a story of how you're being deprived because somebody else is getting something that they don't deserve. And it's so emblematic of the way these debates is not the right word for them, but the way these things play out. That's one from the right, and like I said, there's a buffet to choose from. From the left, this isn't in the book, it happened more recently, but I teach a course at Duke called The Age of Grievance. I've taught it twice now. And a student came in shortly after the eclipse and said, Professor Bruni, you've told us to keep our eyes peeled for the sorts of ridiculous grievances that pop up in contemporary society. I think I have one for you. And I said, what is it? And she showed me a tweet in which someone said that the eclipse was just another example of how people who don't plan ahead are marginalized because there's a shortage of glasses and it's not fair. No, we're all laughing, but I mean, and we'll get into this, but it's a serious thing. There's this itch in modern society to look at any set of circumstances and to try to see where you've been wronged, whom you should be angry at, what you should want to do to punish them. So these are funny stories, but they're emblematic in a way that's really, really scary.
Yeah, and I want to get to why this is a problem later, right? But as I read that, I was like, am I in the fiction section? Because this could not have happened. But actually it did happen,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
And in any normal circumstance or any normal household, in fact, we went through this in our household, right? Like the night before the eclipse, we're like thinking, okay, we need to get eclipse glasses, and my wife's like, we should have planned ahead. Like that is the normal response to not having eclipse glasses.
But you were not aggrieved by it, right?
No, it was our fault.
You did not take to Twitter.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's called maturity.
Right. So, I mean, one of the things about reading this book, and you articulate this well. You're like, listen, we're also a nation that has been built and improved by the articulation of grievances. The grievance over the tea tax in 1776, the grievance over the ugly, deepest sin in American life, slavery. Right? The grievance over the absence of women's suffrage, the grievance over Jim Crow. So tell me, as you were writing the book and kind of thinking it through, what category in your mind, like what distinguished grievances that ought to be addressed through the articulation of the grievance, right? Like there's no analogy of like, well, I should have planned ahead. Right. Vis-a-vis women's suffrage or Jim Crow. And it is your fault for buying your solar eclipse
The tea tax would have been fine if I just budgeted for it.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Right. So do you actually have different terms in mind?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting because as you're talking, so the word grievance used to have not such negative connotations. In fact, the First Amendment has the word grievances right in it, and it's mentioned as like something you are entitled to have it redressed. Like you should be able to seek redress from grievances and all of that. I don't think today we would call any of the things you called grievances because now the word has a negative connotation that is exactly in sync with how complaints have kind of metastasized and proliferated and how we're losing sight of what is a righteous cause and what is just kind of a petty inconvenience. So I think now, like if you just kind of watch for the next week every time you see the word grievance in the news, and you would see it more than you think, it's almost always written with an air of disapproval for someone who's finding a way to complain about something that perhaps doesn't warrant the complaint. But what you're talking about, I think in today's parlance, we would call causes, right? And yeah, we're a nation born of grievance. And there are so many situations, and you mentioned some of the biggest ones in history, where people have been treated horribly, have been the victims of unacceptable injustice, and have said, wait a minute, I won't stand for this. You shouldn't, I shouldn't be put through this. Here's what I want done. Here's what you should want done for me and for the country as a matter of morality and conscience. And those are really important. I think we're in a place now where it's hard for people to hear the legitimate causes, the legitimate requests for correction of injustice because there's just such bedlam and such cacophony in the public square, and everything is so jumbled and mingled together. You know, the people without eclipse glasses being marginalized as late planners, you know, is being jumbled together with much, much more serious stuff.
So in your mind, how do you think about, let's call them legitimate causes, or actually, I'd love your term for it, right? Is the term cause versus grievance? Like build us some categories here. Things that are worth us making kind of a public complaint about or a public address about versus thing where it's like, plan ahead.
So, we need to continue having discussions, call it a cause, whatever. We still live in an era of racial injustice. No right-minded person can say that we have reached a golden age of equal opportunity for people regardless of their skin color, regardless of their ethnicity, regardless of their religion. We're still working toward that, toward the more perfect union and all of that. What concerns me is when people like attach some of those matters of injustice to the wrong set of circumstances, it gives a way for people who want to resist change to just tune them out. I'll give you an example. It's a minor one, but again, it's emblematic. I remember when Brittany Griner was unjustly imprisoned in Russia, right? That was ridiculous, and there needed to be more than a fuss about getting her freed and all that. I read a number of columns by left-wing writers, left-wing press, and saw a lot on social media where people were claiming that she was languishing in a Russian prison because nobody in Washington or in America cared about her or was sensitive to the situation because she was a woman, because she was lesbian, and because she was black, right? Now, do I think we need to do better by women, by black people, and by LGBTQ plus people in this country? I do. Do I think Brittany Griner was forgotten for those reasons? No, we knew more about her as a political prisoner because she was a celebrity than we knew about Paul Whelan, who'd been there, I think, for 5 years, who's still in a Moscow prison, but wasn't a celebrity, and his name only came out in conjunction with hers. There were grievance entrepreneurs, and that's a big part of the problem, who just take their lens of like, where am I seeing sexism, where am I seeing racism, and then they see it in places and in instances where it actually doesn't exist. And the problem with that is it's sort of like the boy who cried wolf. If you claim you see sexism, racism, homophobia, Islamophobia in circumstances where a reasonable person says, no, that doesn't attach there, it makes them think, okay, these complaints are overblown across the board, let's just tune them out.
So I want to spend a moment on this. By the way, grievance entrepreneur, is that in the book, or did you because it's very good. Like just as a fellow writer, I just want to like underscore an excellent phrase.
So I lose track. I think it's in the book, but I know that one of the assignments this semester was to write about a grievance entrepreneur. So it's in the syllabus if it's not in the book.
Okay, but it's yours.
Yes, it's mine.
Okay,
it's mine. Yeah.
All right, we're going to attach it to Frank Bruni.
Yes, I will lay proud claim to the term.
Right. Yeah. Excellent. So. I want to just kind of sit in this question of like, why is this bad? Why is this bad, right? And one of the things that kind of strikes me is, I talk about this with my family, is there's so much attention right now within kind of grievance spaces on the problem of Islamophobia. Mm-hmm. Islamophobia is a problem.
Of course.
It's a problem, right? But Islamophobia is not what makes me Muslim. Islam is what makes me Muslim.
Right.
And there is a problem if you are constantly asking young Muslims, how have you been affected by Islamophobia, and never asking them, how have you been inspired by Islam?
Yeah.
Right? You're like missing the most important thing. And it kind of feels like we are more interested in the forces that are victimizing people rather than the way identity is viewed as a source of pride. And frankly, in the vast majority of homes, people's identities are viewed as a source of pride.
Yes. Yes. So you've just named one of the reasons this is a problem, because it inverts that. Also, if you are encouraged by the culture, or if you go out into the public square and it's constantly about, here is my identity group, and here's what's not happening for my identity group, and here's how I've been aggrieved, and here's what I'm owed. You're also erecting all of these boundaries and lines of division between you and everybody else. We are spending less and less time talking about the collective good, because we're so enraptured with what each group is going through and what that group is owed and what it's demanding. And it needs to be proportional. If it feels too often these days like every interest group is positioned and competing against the other. And that sends a message that's antithetical in some ways to pluralism, to the civic good, to the collective good. I just don't hear many people talking about, well, in this situation, what's best for the country, what's best for the largest number of people, what's most moral for the largest number of people. I hear, look at how the media covers a politician who's coming out, like when a campaign starts. I always read the story like how this group is likely to feel about this politician, what this politician is or isn't saying to this group. The message of that is that we're all divided up and we're all looking for different things, when I think most of us are looking ultimately for the same thing. Mm-hmm. And I just think it can be a very divisive force.
Yeah, John Haidt calls this common humanity approaches versus common enemy approaches.
Right.
One of the things I think that one reason that this way of thinking is negative, but let's stay on this for a minute, is because you lose perspective, right? So there are 8 billion people in the world. Half of them live on less than $7 a day. 1.5 billion people live with parasitic worms. This is your colleague, Nick Kristof, who writes on this, right? And
for a minute, I'm like, the segue from parasitic worms to Nick Kristof was feeling a little bit like, what?
But it doesn't surprise you at all that he would bring that to the fore, right?
No, Nick is a national treasure. Yeah.
But I remember my own kind of age of grievance, and age was, I mean, like in terms of being late adolescent, early 20s. And I am in a taxi cab with my dad in Bombay, India. And at the time I was a graduate student at Oxford, and I was feeling very out of place. And so I dressed it up with all these fancy terms, right? Like, this is the heart of the colonial enterprise, and it doesn't know what to do when the empire strikes back. Being an Indian student at Oxford, being super fancy, like I'm pulling out Spivak and Said. You would have been very impressed, right?
I'm impressed as I sit here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And my dad gives me this look, and then he points out the window to one of the 500 leprous beggar children on the street. And he's like, if you're oppressed, what word do you have for that kid?
That's right. We've cheapened the word oppression. We've cheapened the idea of oppression. And you were talking before about how to distinguish between a legitimate grievance or a righteous grievance. I think the more interesting distinction is how you render your complaint, right? What is a kind of constructive way and not a divisive way to do it, and what's the opposite? And one thing I write about in the book, of the many things I'm not aggrieved by in my lifetime, I have seen this country change so profoundly and in such a positive direction when it comes to the treatment and the acceptance of LGBTQ plus people. When I was a teenager, and I realized I was gay, if you had told me that in my lifetime I would see same-sex marriage, marriage equality, coast to coast, et cetera, I would have said that's crazy. And for a long time, that was nowhere in the foreground of the gay rights movement because it was seen as like utopian and ridiculous. Obviously, we got there. And if you go back and you look at how that happened, one of the big ways it happened is the main conversation, the tenor of that wasn't, here's how hideously wronged we are, here's how evil you are for depriving us of this. It was, we really want in on what you have. We want to join this tradition. We so respect the values of this institution. We're so like you in the sort of commitments we want to make, and in the sort of sacredness with which we want to imbue that we would like to join this. That was, there were all sorts of voices, and not all of them said that. But if you go back and you look at what the main argument was, the preponderance of conversations, that's what it was. And it kept in beautiful harmony this request by one group and the whole society and the collective good. And I think that's an example of how to, again, grievance is a tough word these days, but how to press a grievance in a way that rights an injustice, that makes us all better, and that never loses sight of the collective good and doesn't demonize people, right? No one was saying, here's how bad you are for not allowing this. They were saying, here's how much better you could be. I wish we would have more conversations when we're addressing the variety of injustices in our country in that vein and in that tone.
So let's pause here for a second, because I was an undergraduate when the movement for gay marriage was gaining traction. So Andrew Sullivan writes his book in the late 1980s on this. I'm an undergraduate at the University of Illinois in the early to mid 1990s, and I actually heard lots of accusations against gay marriage from my very progressive and gay friends, right? Heteropatriarchy, et cetera, et cetera. So the way lots of other things I can barely pronounce. But I said with utter confidence at the time, I'm sure. Right. So I want to kind of dance with you on this a little bit. So what do you make of Stonewall? What do you make of ACT UP? What do you make of the range of, frankly, highly romanticized, very kind of in your face pushes that lots of people say laid the foundation for the, as you put in your recent New York Times op-ed piece, the ability to ask, quote unquote, politely rather than to shout in people's faces for something that, frankly, just is quite sensible, which is everybody should have access to the institution of marriage.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think ACT UP, and I knew a lot of people in ACT UP, had a lot of friends who were participating in it. I think it absolutely did some good because there were a lot of people who didn't even know what AIDS was until they saw those protests. I'm not sure, we can't kind of like measure this thing over time. I'm not sure if some of what they did at times was not bringing things forward. But I'll tell you, I want to focus on the positive here. I want us to not be aggrieved. I'll tell you what I think, and this is maybe a controversial statement among some gay historians and gay activists. I'll tell you what I think did more good than ACT UP. The AIDS quilt. The AIDS quilt. When you had people all around the country memorializing people who had died, right? And then when you had that all strung together and you had it covering the Washington Mall, the sort of for lack of a better word, the language of that visual, which is now they just mixed two metaphors or mixed a bunch of stuff. But I mean, there's something about the idiom of the AIDS quilt that I think spoke to Americans across region, across religion, across class. It was a visual demonstration of the toll that this had taken. It was homespun in a really beautiful way. I think there's a lesson in that.
So I'm going to demonstrate this for you. So I grew up 25 miles due west of here in a town called Glen Ellen, Illinois. When I was growing up in the 1980s and early 1990s, it was not the most cosmopolitan place. I was always embarrassed about, my grandmother's sorry, and playing Smear the Queer was common on the playground. Okay, I get to the University of Illinois in 1993, and the university brings the AIDS quilt. And I remember just happening to walk through the Illini Union and happening to stop into Illini Room A and looking at these panels, and 11 panels in, I am weeping. And I am deeply embarrassed about the things that I said frequently growing up. It changed my life.
Each of those panels not only showed you someone whose life was lost, but it told you how many people loved that person.
Yeah.
Right? And how many people were diminished, I'm going to cry now, how many people were diminished by that person's death?
That was the same year that Philadelphia came out.
Yeah.
And Springsteen writes the song, right? And Neil Young writes the song. And it was, I remember, this is 35 years ago, and it was deeply, deeply moving to me.
Right.
And it was because somebody reached out and took my hand instead of put a fist in my face.
And if Philadelphia came out today, there might be boycotts of it because Tom Hanks, a straight actor, was playing a gay man. That's also not a joke.
Yeah,
not a joke.
No, that is, yeah. If you are looking for grievance, you are not finding other things. Philadelphia requires you to sit through the movie as an inquiry, not as a judgment.
Yeah, we're into condemnation, we're not into grace.
Yeah, and you just learn less, right? You connect less and you learn less.
I live in a family with a range of political views. I have relatives who not only voted for Trump in 2016, but who voted for him in 2020. And please forgive me, I don't mean to make this political, but I don't want to know what they're doing in 2024. I like to digest my food at the Thanksgiving table. But my point is, what we're able to do as a family is see each other in multidimensional ways, to see each other as larger than just politics, to understand that everybody around us has aspects that resonate with us and that we approve of and others that we don't. And life is complicated and human beings are complex. And I know so many families, we've talked about this a lot in my class at Duke this semester, the Age of Grievance class. So many families find a way to extend grace to one another and to see each other in the most nuanced way and in the most forgiving light. The family of America seems unable to do that right now. And that's what I would like our conversation here, that's what I would like my book to nudge people a little toward. I'm not saying let go of your principles. I'm not saying don't fight for your principles. I'm not saying, make your values a negotiable thing or whatever. But as you kind of navigate the public square, just hold on to a measure of grace. That's it.
So I love this. I want to stay here for a second. So one of the things we like saying at Interfaith America is the only way to have a diverse democracy is to be able to disagree on some things and work together on other things. And one of the things that I used to say when I was younger and aggrieved, and I hear a lot of people saying right now is, well, everything is political. I need to make a political statement about everything. And I think to myself sometimes, I'm like, is everything political, really?
I mean, if everything is political, it's an exhausting way to live, but it's also exactly the kind of thinking that paralyzes our Congress and means we don't get kind of basic things done that really an overwhelming majority of people agree about. No one wants to give the other side a win. It's all tribalism, and it's all like, yeah, I may agree with you on this, but if I join forces with you on this, you're going to get a win. And that's not going to be good for my team. So forget about the merits of the issue. Let's just kind of approach this in a completely competitive and tribal way. That is antithetical to making basic progress as a country. And we're trapped in it. And I mean, you see it in our politics for about 10, 15 years. I mean, I don't have the timeline perfectly, but it hasn't been that long that there have been a lot of discussions about negative partisanship, a term that, in widespread use is not that old. We're beyond negative partisanship to something I think of now as apocalyptic partisanship, right? If you look at so many of the most bitterly fought political campaigns, whatever else the candidate is saying, he, she, or they are saying first and foremost that my opponent is evil, my opponent is going to be the end of the world, you must vote for me because you must vote against that person, right? If both sides in a political campaign are saying that person is the end of days, that person is the end of us, vote for me simply as a hedge and obstacle against that person, then if that person wins, how does he, she, or they govern, right? Because you're not saying, what happened to the era when, go back to 2000, this is how much we've changed. Can you imagine anybody in today's climate doing what Al Gore did in 2000? And saying at a certain point, okay, this fight has gone on long enough. I and my side still think we probably won the state of Florida. We won the popular vote. But at this point in time, the country needs to move on. And he did that with grace. And he didn't spend the next several years relitigating it or saying, woe is me. He went on and made other positive contributions to society. Contrast that with a certain person who legitimately lost the presidential election in 2020.
Well, John McCain in 2008, right? Go back and watch that concession speech. He opens by saying, this country just did something remarkable.
Or better yet, and this is in the book, I think it's a bit of footage I played my students this semester, go back and look at that famous moment when John McCain was doing a rally, right? Yeah. In 2008, and someone said, about Obama, he's not a family man, he's a Muslim, he's this, that, whatever. And John McCain stopped and said, no, ma'am. No, he's a good family man. He loves his country. We have differences of opinion. I think I would be a better president, but he's a good man. That's another moment like Al Gore's concession that I think it's hard to imagine playing out the same way today.
That used to be normal, right? That's like one of my favorite moments in American life is when basketball players hug each other after the game is over, when football players hug each other after the game is over, right? You have gone at each other for hours in very physical ways, and now you're congratulating. I love that, right? You cannot have a diverse democracy without that kind of ethos. So Frank, do you have lines of people you're not talking to? So you're talking to Cousin Al at the Thanksgiving table, right? Who might have voted for Donald Trump. So I like to say, I'm not buying a brownie from the KKK bake sale, but I'm talking to everybody else, right? Do you have lines? Do you have lines?
I mean, yeah, it's like when we talk about free speech on campus, I would not invite someone who is a committed and florid and outspoken white separatist neo-Nazi to campus. I would not seek out a conversation with that person because it's pointless. If that person were in front of me, and that person, say, like, had a heart attack and needed help, would I help that person? Yeah, because I'm a human being. You know, that's a gesture of humanity. I don't think we can talk to everyone, but I think we can talk to most people, and I think we're better served by talking to them. Because you just never know what somebody's going to do and when somebody's going to surprise you. I mean, look recently, it's an isolated instance. Maybe it won't be, I hope it won't be, but look recently at what happened in Congress with Mike Johnson. I think 4 months prior, nobody would have expected that. They wouldn't have written him off. Doesn't mean he's a good man necessarily. I mean, I don't like those terms, so forget that. It doesn't change, I don't, good and bad, but it doesn't change the fact, that he played an assertive role in trying to overturn the legitimate results of the 2020 election. That's there, that's in the history books, and that's not okay. But we're better served, if we're being kind of practical, by trying to coax the best out of him now, by celebrating when he's done something that we think is a triumph of principle and the collective good over something else, rather than kind of saying, no, we've determined that he's a demon, he's on the other side, it is just condemnation and damnation for him every sentence, every second, henceforth. That's not a practical way to go forward.
Yeah, so, one of the things, even though I am not super interested in like how well the KKK bakes, let us say, right? I have a lot of admiration for people.
I didn't know they were big bakers.
I'm going to get the most out of this metaphor.
Okay.
When George Wallace, was George or Henry Wallace, but one of those, the racist one, when he had a heart attack, who visited him in the hospital? Shirley Chisholm, right? Like, I think those are beautiful. I have a lot of admiration. I mean, I think there is something heroic and to be admired in that. I am not interested in being in that position on the regular, but there is a reason. And frankly, this is in lots of religious traditions. It's one of the things that kind of we love the most at Interfaith America is stories of people who exhibit generosity in the face of hatred.
And what would, again, to do today versus then, if an analogous situation happened today and a Shirley Chisholm of today did that, would be buried on Twitter, would literally just kind of be hatred shoveled on her over and over again because she had consorted with the enemy.
Yeah, well, I mean, one thinks of Jesus, right? Like, what does Jesus do? Jesus forgives. What does Gandhi do in the moment in which he is shot? He forgives. What does the Prophet Muhammad do when a woman is throwing trash at him? She takes sick, she takes ill, and he goes and visits her. In other words, the cosmic stories in our narratives, right? The kind of the ones that have lasted for thousands and thousands of years are the people who have crossed even the most challenging lines. So
we've gone from leading by example to leading by excoriation. That was my attempt at off-the-cuff alliteration.
It's excellent. Excellent. Okay, are there structural reasons for the age of grievance?
I mean, there are a number, but one of the biggest ones is what we just mentioned, social media. And the kind of change in media entirely. So when I was growing up back in the Paleolithic era, you had like 4 news, and this was not ideal for a bunch of reasons, which I'm not going to get into because we have limited time. But if you wanted TV news at night, your choices were ABC, NBC, CBS, and maybe PBS, depending on your market. And there was a newscast that was an attempt to kind of say, okay, here's the variety, the basket of things that we all need to know, the kind of talking points we all need to have. And for a long period of time, it was governed by the fairness doctrine. They had to present 2 sides, et cetera. It meant that we had a more or less shared truth. We had a script that all of us knew what it was, even if we kind of read from it in different ways or privileged certain lines over the others. Now we live, whether it's the cable dial or whether it's the way you set up your social media feeds or whether it's what you bookmark, now we live in an era where you curate your information, your news, your facts in an individual way. It is human nature to tend to do that even without meaning to, in a way that simply kind of validates and thus kind of reinforces and amplifies whatever your existing views are, with everybody consuming individual different news, with everybody being influenced in these totally different ways, we can't have the conversations we used to because we're not proceeding from the same place, right? Everybody lives in this boutique, bespoke reality, and that's an enormous part of the problem.
Yeah, and the incentive is to say something outrageous because there will be an audience for it. I mean, one of my favorite parts of your story of I feel oppressed because other people bought up all the eclipse glasses was how many likes that tweet got.
Yeah, thousands.
Yeah.
And by the way, I think the tweet may have been satiric, and it was, no, seriously, and it was a reflection of the era we live in that people took it seriously, you know?
Yeah, right. Okay, so we're gonna open up the can of worms here. College campuses, legitimate grievance? Not legitimate grievance, articulated illegitimately. What do you make of the last week?
I'm going to give you a really frustrating answer, which is I think, and we don't say this enough in our public conversations because everyone feels compelled to take a side and defend the side and articulate that side with the most florid language possible. This is a really, really tough situation because it is hard to say to students who are watching what's happening in Gaza and are feeling heartsick and feeling politically activated by it, it's really hard to say to them, like, you need to be quiet, you need to shut up, we're going to like sweep you away. On the other hand, you can't have any number of those students shouting viciously anti-Semitic things, making Jewish students and Jewish faculty on campuses feel endangered and vilified. That's not okay either. This is a really hard one to adjudicate because I care about free speech, I care about academic freedom, I don't want to tell young people I don't want them to be politically engaged, and yet if you've got people in your midst saying October 7th every day, that's not okay. Because if they were saying the equivalent about another minority group, it just would not be allowed to go on. I do not have an easy fix for this one because there are legitimate frustrations and complaints on both sides, and it's very hard to come up with a solution that respects everybody's individual liberty and keeps everybody safe and respected.
So my family and I were having this conversation a couple of nights ago, and I quoted to them one of the people who was in the op-ed world with you some decades back. One of my favorite lines in American Letters, William Raspberry saying, "The smartest people I know believe both sides of the issue." The smartest people I know believe both sides of the issue.
But one of the problems with the age of grievance is as soon as you say something like what you just said, you're guilty of both sidesism, right? Or you're creating a false equivalence, or you're just namby-pamby and you kind of don't know what you think. I mean, I think ambiguity is a good word. I think ambivalence can be a good word. I think uncertainty is fine. I say to my students all the time, like to a lot of things they ask, it's really complicated. Or we're still trying, we have more questions about that than answers. We're in a society, social media is one of the incentives, but there are others, where like everybody wants to rush to a position because that shows strength apparently. And then the problem is once you've rushed to a position, then you start defending it and curating the news and all your information to support it because nobody wants to say I was wrong or I was hasty.
This is one of the subtle dangers of social media, right? I remember kind of styling myself as a politically radical activist when I was 18 years old. And then many months after I stopped being that person internally, I had to keep on wearing the mask because I created a character for myself.
Yeah.
But that was in the age before social media.
Right.
So in other words, I'd only created that character to a few dozen people and I still felt like I had to wear that mask, right? So what happens if like you have 500
Although now your character would be called a brand. You'd created that brand for yourself.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I didn't have a brand. I was just 18 and dumb, right? It wasn't a brand. I mean, great. I just read this. The fame is a mask, or a public reputation is a mask that eats away at your face, right? But like, try telling that to a 16-year-old with a social media account that you are creating an image of yourself that you might not want to live up to in a year. So maybe you should tone it down.
That's right. Yeah. Social media is very unforgiving. Yeah.
Cesspool on Mars.
Thank you all for coming tonight, by the way. It's so nice to see you here. I sense, and I would like you to close by answering this, I'm sensing a turning. I don't think it's going to happen tomorrow, but I meet and speak with so many people who are so exhausted by the intensity of our partisanship, by the magnitude of our polarization. And I do think that if such a person could get through the primaries, I think that person could be very powerful in a general election. And I would also say, just so we're being very accurate here, if you go back to 2020, if you look at that whole Democratic field and we take age out of the equation, Joe Biden was actually, his message was much more moderate and much more unifying than some of the Democrats whom he beat for the nomination. I think that's a kind of, whatever you think of his presidency since then, I think it's a reassuring signal and it's a reassuring taking of the public temperature. And I think it does suggest there's an appetite for what you've talked about. What do you think?
Yeah, so I'll actually close with a story that we're intimate with in Chicago, which is about Obama. But before I do that, let me just say thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Like we. There's a great line by Rumi, the great Muslim poet, about the holiness of shedding light and not generating heat, and that's what you do. That's what you do, and it's very important. It's very important. So thank you. So I came back to Chicago. I went to graduate school in England. I came back to Chicago in late 2001. I'm trying to start this organization, back then called Interfaith Youth Corps, now called Interfaith America, and I'm making a list of like the important Chicagoans to go see that could, can help me start this organization. So, Cardinal George is on the list, and Mayor Daley is on the list, and John Rowe, who's the CEO of Exelon's on the list. And somebody mentions to me, hey, you ought to try to get a meeting with this guy, Barack Obama, right? This is like December 2001. So I look Barack Obama up. I'm like, the most recent data point about this guy is he got trounced by 30 points in a congressional race. So he wound up as number 47 on my list of people to see in Chicago. That's December 2001, okay? So when he runs for the Senate in 2000, the seat in 2004, the first poll, the name recognition poll, not even the approval rate poll, the name recognition poll for Obama was an asterisk. That's how many people recognized his name, okay? And we in Chicago watch the rise of somebody who is principally about bringing people together, right? Do you remember that? We're not red and blue America, right? That whole, right? And one of my favorite Obama stories is after he wins the presidency, WTTW, and if there's applause for that, please. It's important to have a treasure like that in the city. WTTW does a local kind of the rise of Obama special, and they ask Will Burns. Will Burns was in Obama's state Senate office and was part of his early Senate campaign, but didn't go with him, into the general election, et cetera. They asked this guy who knew Obama when he was in his early political phase, what were you doing that night in 2004 when Barack Obama was giving that famous DNC speech, right? The red and blue speech, right? And Will Burns says, I was sitting in my one-bedroom apartment in Hyde Park, mouthing the words along with him, because I'd seen him give that speech 1,000 times before. And the thing I love about the story is that Barack Obama was always Barack Obama. Whether he was in a South Side church in 2000 talking to 15 people, and my wife and I actually went to an early fundraiser for Obama. There were 30 people there. My wife's a civil rights attorney. Obama talked to her for 10 minutes, right, in 2002, right? And we watch not just an individual, but the message of hope and unity and coming together, and we're better together. We watch it go from very, very niche to absolutely a social norm, and it can happen again. Yeah. And why not in this city? Thank you for prodding us in that direction.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.
That was Frank Bruni and Eboo Patel, live at the Chicago History Museum at the Chicago Humanities Spring Festival in April 2024. Head to the show notes for more information on Bruni's book, The Age of Grievance, as well as links to more info on Eboo Patel and the other works mentioned. Chicago Humanities Tapes is produced and hosted by me, Alisa Rosenthal, with help from the team at Chicago Humanities for the programming and production of the live events. Head to chicagohumanities.org for more information on how to catch your favorite speaker in person the next time they're in town. New episodes of Chicago Humanities Tapes drop first thing every other Tuesday morning wherever you get your podcasts. And hey, big shout out to all of those who are giving us ratings on Apple, Spotify, Overcast, Pocket Casts. It's a huge help. If you like what you hear, you can also leave us a review and share your favorite episode with your friends, and make sure to scroll through our incredible backlog of programs to discover a gem that might surprise you. We'll be back in 2 weeks with an exclusive in-studio interview with podcaster and writer Greta Johnson. So, in the meantime, stay human.